Welcome back to Karen's Bookshelf. My name is Karen Osman and I'm here at the Emirates Festival of Literature 2020, and I'm lucky enough to manage to grab an interview with a YA writer, Alwyn Hamilton. Alwyn, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And this is the debut novel, isn't it?
That's right. That's
Rebel of the Sands.
Book.
And this is the first in a trilogy.
Yes.
It's done incredibly well, New York Times best-selling and everything like that. So was writing always a childhood dream for you, or is it quite a recent ambition?
It was always a childhood dream. I grew up being a huge reader, as many people who turn into writers are. That's nothing new about that. But I was sort of slightly distinct in that I grew up speaking English at home and reading for pleasure in English, but going to school in French because I grew up in France. And so I would read all these books that I was so excited about and loved so much, but many of them weren't translated into French. And so I had no one to talk about being so excited about all these books. And I just needed somewhere to put the love of them. And so I think that was almost my response to reading. I needed something to write back to, so I started writing as a response to reading and having nowhere else to share my love of reading. So it's almost my letter back. My correspondence with the world of books was writing. And when you're young and you first start writing, I mean, plagiarism is a strong word, but the stories you write sound a lot like the stories that you're reading. So I'd read Harry Potter and I'd be like, oh, I'm inspired to write a story about a young girl who goes to a magical boarding school. And then you kind of find your own voice. So that was why I started writing as a child, and then developed it a bit more as an adult, held on to the dream.
Amazing. And what gave you the idea for these books as a trilogy? And did you set out to write a trilogy, or was it,
I didn't set out to write a trilogy. I actually thought I could contain the whole story as it's currently contained in the trilogy in one book because I'm foolish. So I had the ending all planned out right from even before I started putting pen to paper to write Rebel of the Sands. And it is the ending that is still the end of Here with the Fall. It hasn't changed, but it just took me a few more books to get there.
And the ideas, where did you get your ideas from?
So for this one, the very inception of the idea was because I saw someone arguing online that it was unrealistic for, in fantasy novels, women to be the action hero lead, the heroic lead. It's a little bit similar to, you might have seen this, that someone in the fantasy world made this argument online about The Witcher recently, that his biggest problem with The Witcher was that there was a woman wielding a sword in the pilot episode, and that's completely unrealistic. It's a very heavy sword, and women are very frail and would not be able to lift them. And I was just thinking, so your biggest problem with this, is the woman holding the sword is not realistic, but I saw the pilot, and the first thing you see is a giant monster surge up out of a lake, and and this completely horrifying monster. So that's not more unrealistic than a woman lifting something that might be a little bit heavy. But that's been an argument for a long time, and I saw something online about that years ago, and it made me so cross that I was like, well, I'm going to write a woman with a different kind of weapon, one that you can't make that argument about. I'm going to write a female sharpshooter, because you can't say a woman is too frail to lift a pistol. Yeah. So that was sort of the beginning of the idea, and I initially envisioned as a Western, because that was sort of very Annie Oakley kind of thing. And then I had the idea, probably subconsciously because I was working in Islamic art at the time, to integrate the stories from The 1001 Nights, which I'd loved so much as a child. And it sort of turned into Wild West meets 1001 Nights.
Brilliant, brilliant. And so you're based in London now.
That's right.
What is your sort of writing schedule like? How do you spend your day?
Yeah. Well, I'm lucky enough to write full-time now. Before I wrote full-time, I used to be sort of evening, weekends, wherever I could grab a little bit of space. Now what I tend to try to do is sort of try to force myself to schedule something in the morning so I don't procrastinate too much, or even if it's as simple as coffee with a friend, or or a dentist appointment or something, just to force me to get dressed and get out of the house. And then I will usually sit in a cafe from anywhere from sort of 6 to 8 hours, depending on what time they close and kick me out, and write as much as I can. And then when I'm not too crazily and too close to my deadline, I'll try to then take the next day off to do other things that you have to do as an author that no one tells you about, that's boring, like your taxes and answering emails and things like that, and then write the next day. So I'll write for 8 hours on a Monday, answer emails, do other things on a Tuesday, write for 8 hours on a Wednesday, and so on and so forth, with an occasional day off in there. And I'll try to make a schedule for myself of saying, okay, if I need to turn the book in on the 1st of December and I have 30 days to get there, how many words do I need to write per day? And keep myself accountable to that.
Yeah, that's really good. Do you plan quite a bit as well, or is it more of an organic process?
I plan a little bit. I always know where I'm going, sort of what ending I'm trying to get to, and I have I like to call them pillars of how to get there, but how I get between them sort of develops a bit more organically. And you also have to give yourself space to change. So I think if you're too stuck on an idea, you can get a little bit sort of into that, or and forgive yourself if one day you were supposed to write 5,000 words and you only wrote 3. You'll tell yourself you'll catch up on those 2,000 words another day when you're feeling a bit more, inspired.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, just for viewers watching who may want to become a writer, become an author, what is the single most important piece of advice, writing advice, that you've given or received?
I think the piece of writing advice that made me think really differently about writing is reframing the phrase "be creative." Because if you say to anyone, think of the most original idea you can ever think of that no one has ever thought of, all they can think of is ideas other people have thought of. It's like saying, don't think of the color blue, and you're like, that's all you can think of. But essentially reframing "be creative" as think of an idea that's unique to you. And that means an idea that is inspired by who you are as a person, your life experiences, what you're interested in, what you're afraid of, what you're passionate about, and integrate that into a book, because that is being creative. But you don't think of it that way because all these things seem so natural to you. So for me, some of what that meant was, it's not a spoiler to tell you that there's a rebellion in Rebel of the Sands, and something that has been a huge part of my learning life for a long time is the French Revolution, because I grew up in France. That's a big part of your education. And then at university, I studied art of the French Revolution. And so that idea, that interest in revolutions and rebellions and upheavals of government is something that really informed then writing a book about a rebellion. And so I always say that to people, if even if you don't know that much about it, if you're passionate about it, or whatever it might be, your experience of being an older sibling or being a younger sibling for kids, that might inspire your book, or whatever it may be. Yeah. So that's a way for me to reframe "be creative," because I think of an idea is terrifying, whereas be yourself but on the page is less terrifying.
Good advice, good advice. And what can readers expect for you in the future? Are you working on anything now?
I am. I'm working on a new duology called The Notorious Virtues, is the name of the first book, and it's set in the same world as Rebel of the Sands, but a few decades later and in a different country. So there's some links. One of the main characters of The Notorious Virtues is a descendant of one of the characters from Rebel of the Sands, so there's a nice little link there if you've sort of an Easter egg for you to find. But I'd sort of describe it as 1920s heiresses of New York meet the Grimm fairy tales. So that's my shtick, apparently. Blank meets blank. But so I'm really excited. So it's more elaborate dresses than there were in Rebel of the Sands, and more sort of ridiculous opulence and wealth, which I've enjoyed writing.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Alwyn, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun.
And congratulations on all your successes.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
That's everything from me. I look forward to seeing you next week on Karen's Bookshelf.